Hello. The Dramaturges of Yan by John Brunner is an absolutely fantastic book, in my opinion. Not so humble opinion. I'm quite fond of it. It's one of those books where you read and you go, how come people aren't talking about this book? How come other books of what I would call less moment were incredibly influential and are still being talked about and reprinted, but the Dramaturges of Yan never was? So there's a lot to talk about with this book. A couple of words about John Brunner. I didn't know very much about him until I bought 2 or 3 of his books fairly recently. The ones I've already read I enjoyed, and I had expectations of this, but they were more than met. They were completely and utterly exceeded. John Brunner himself was one of the English authors. Apparently he wasn't really in favour with the set, I suppose, of science fiction authors in England in the 70s. They didn't much like him. They thought his books were apparently too American. And the Dramaturges of Yan, I do believe, was initially published in America. So that's perhaps why we don't hear as much about John Brunner. Brunner, one of those. He apparently also was a difficult person, and during his wife's lifetime, she did most of the relationships with the editors and stuff. Other thing about this book is the cover, which I think is just gorgeous. Now, it looks very, very space opera science fiction. I don't know who painted it, by the way. There's no indication. I did look because I quite liked it. But as I was reading this book, I'm going, this doesn't really seem to relate in any way to the contents. It's such a pretty cover that I didn't much mind. But as I reached the end, I realised this is actually extremely relevant to the contents. If you take these strange stone structures, sorry, but I'm moving it around. I'm not trying to make you seasick. I'm just trying to get a lack of reflection. If you accept these structures as the strange monuments of the ancient Yan past, and you accept this really straight, tiny line that you probably can't see very well here as the modern Yan walking towards it, then you actually have something that does relate to the book. I hope there's other people out there, by the way, who've read this book, and if not, you need to go and do that. Unless you're really into modern science fiction. Anyway, this ring is a feature in the book. The ancient Yan civilization, which built all these monuments, also exploded their moon, and now there's this ring around Yan that fires down meteorites and makes a large portion of it uninhabitable. And that's what I think that is, and that's what I think all these dots are meant to be, the meteorites. I don't think they're meant to be stars. I think they're meant to be meteorites raining down on the planet of Yan. Now, this rather odd spacecrafty thing, I kept thinking, I know what it's meant to be, but it doesn't fit. However, if you turned it around and it was first seen from this angle, you would see it as a huge circle. Anyway, if you haven't read this book, all of that is obscure. So, the back cover description is very, very, I'm going to say, constrained. It talks about a far-flung galactic civilization, but it doesn't mention some interesting features of them. In this future, space travel in actual starships is very rare. Instead, what Earthmen use to go to what I think is about 100 different colonized or civilized planets is the go board. Brunner envisaged the go board as a matrix onto which you step. You postulate to have a location's coordinates memorized under hypnosis. You then step onto the go board, you type in the coordinates, and you go to wherever. We learn this through a character called Eric, who is a freelance drug experimenter who has come to Yan. Now, the world of Yan, which is where we start the novel, is fascinating. Brunner describes a world with aliens who are biologically very different from humans, but physically resemble us in some ways. He talks about other intelligent species that have been found around the galaxy, which are often also bipedal, upright, and a few other similarities. But on Yan, the physiological differences, which Brunner does explore, like their breathing apparatus is where size of our rib cage would be, and they can breathe continuously. Their physiological internal organs. He doesn't go into it a great deal, but he tells you just enough to know that we are very, very separate races. However, while physiologically we resemble each other, psychologically much less so. There are also, I should mention here, there are physical differences that mean that a human and their opposite gender among the Yans can have a very satisfying relationship to both. And there are a couple of notable incidences in this book which are very much part of the plot, which do. There's no gratuitous sex, though. If that sort of thing bothers you, you won't worry about this. Okay, psychologically, the Yan are not very much like humans at all. They are generally conceived to have had a much larger, very, very technological civilization at some time in the past, because there's monuments scattered all the way around the world. But by the time the Earthmen arrived, they had a small, incredibly socially stable, and remarkably, what Earth considered to be content, but we later find out was more of a stagnating society. A weary society from things that had happened that ended that great civilization stage, which had built monuments, some of which could not in any way be replicated by Earth, and which they don't really understand how some of them were built. The Yan are, for the most part, polite, hospitable, largely uninterested in human technology, except for a very small number of younger Yan who are fascinated by humans. They mimic them, they wear their clothes, they discard their traditional folklore in favor of entering into a mimic culture of humans, and I'm not going to use the word they use in the book because it doesn't work too well. And a couple have also entered into relationships with humans, as we say is, I'm looking for the word, there's a mutine prophecies, which are like this huge folklore. I imagine them kind of as 11 books of the Finnish Kalevala. And one of the characters has translated them. Now, the world is fascinating with the exploding moon sometime in its past. Was there a moon? Did it explode? That's a question that's asked early on. There's this very narrow band of livable area. Due to it, the equator and regions around it are subject to those huge meteorites. I mentioned that on the cover. All this world is very beautifully, very lyrically described in a very visual way that takes a long time to absorb. So this is not a fast book to read at all. There's another quirk, 158 pages, it took me a few days. There's another significant quirk to the writing, which especially in the beginning means you have to be fully focused on it. You can't be distracted. There are many point of views and many characters set up very fast in the first part of the book. The author skips from one to the other without even a paragraph difference. There's a full stop, but that's it. And you go from Dr. Lem's perspective to Governor Chmelevsky's perspective, and you get no warning at all. No warning. Nothing. He uses this technique to create a very rounded view of any given scene, and I don't know how he did this, but it didn't annoy me. Normally I would hate that. I hate multiple point of views where I'm not told whose point of view I'm coming from. It really, really annoys me. But somehow with John Brunner's Dramaturges of Yan, I was cool with it. It was fine. And that might be because it was really weird, but it might be because the individual characters are so much their own thing that are merely a focus where you experience the story through. Now, by about halfway, if he was still doing it, and I think he still was, I wasn't noticing it at all. And also the characters were separate enough that I don't think it was needed anymore. So yeah, really, really odd writing style that I have not really experienced before, but didn't mind. That's really surprising. Okay, so having set us up with this world, all these multitude of Earthmen inhabitants. We get a night where a huge moon rises in the sky where there has not had a moon for decades. No, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, if ever. This moon is eventually revealed as the starship of Gregory Chant, who is an interstellar artist who creates these. They're not too well or accurately described, but he creates world-altering spectacles. They include dramatizations, illusions, and he builds them from the actual history or myths or desires of the people. And sometimes he makes them feel like a dream, sometimes he makes them feel like an epic saga. He is an artist with a form of artistry that has never been seen before. He created it. And while we've heard that there's other people who mimic it, apparently he's still the supreme artist. He is very, very old. We later learn that he's over 100. He travels around in this starship, and this is what he does. He's done, I think, 3 or 4 spectacles for Europe, 1 for North America, a couple for Asia and Africa, 1 for Australia. Well done. And now he's turned his interest to doing a huge spectacle for a non-human species. He seems to see it as a challenge, the swan song of his career, if you will, to be able to make one of these magnificent dramatization performances for a non-human species. Now, the Earthmen on Chant do not have, and women, the Earth people, humans, on Chant have got very mixed opinions about this. Gregory Chant is also known to have created illusions that shatter societies. And one planet where he's done that keeps coming up into question. I'll let you read that part. So one of our characters, the character we start with, is Dr. Lem, who has an alien kitty type animal. If you're into cats, you will really like that animal. Starts with Dr. Lem. Dr. Lem has been on the planet where he's shattered the civilization in the past. He's unenthusiastic about Chant performing here. Another characteristic, one of our main protagonists, is a poet, Mark Simon. Now, Mark has gone native. He's left the enclave where the humans live. He lives in a Yan-style house with a Yan partner called Shaylee, who is one of those people who loves human society and mimics it. He's dolefully aware that probably his only attraction is that he's human, and without that, she might not be interested in him. But, he's a poet, so they do tend to agonize over things a bit. Now, what Mark is known for is translating these mythology epic poems that the Yan people have. He thinks that there's 11 of them. He later finds out he's wrong. There's actually 12. But that's a story. That's a plot development. Mark is disturbed by Chant's arrival. On one hand, there's this artist of all artists, and he may get a chance to see his work. He gives him credit for inventing a whole new medium in which he is the unchallenged leader, no matter how many people try to mimic him. But he's disturbed by the repercussions that this sort of performance might have. Then he finds out that one of the things that led Chant to the world of Yan is actually Mark's own translations of the mythology upon which he plans to base his event. And it gets more complicated than that. There's characters, there's stuff happens. Read it and find out. So from this point on, we have a pretty interesting story. We've got lots of point of views and lots of characters, some savoury, some unsavoury, some very hypothesizing. I'm not even going to try and describe it. I think really if anything that I say or anything you hear about this book is in any way attractive, you should read it. And I think most people who like the truly speculative science fiction will enjoy it. After a while, the different factions find out that they've got nothing to say about Chant performing or not, because the Yan themselves go to him and ask him to put on a performance. Now, around about the 2/3 of the bookmark, we start to realise that what Brunner isn't really really is talking about here is not a lot of the things you thought he was. They were misdirections. What he's really talking about is life, alien intelligence, and society, how they could and what they could look like. Now, toward the end, you've got the psychologist, Dr. Lem, who I mentioned before, and the poet Mark, and they're in an observation dome together, waiting for the performance to begin, or which may unleash or reprogram or heal the entire civilization of Yan. They also find out other things about the planet that they didn't know, and that's what they're talking about there really is about civilization and consciousness and experience and societal goals. And it's very well done. It's very enjoyable. In hindsight, you could think of it as being perhaps a slow book. You don't have a lot of fast-paced adventure, but it didn't feel slow to me. It felt exciting all the way along the way, even though not a lot was happening. We were basically talking about things. But it's a lot hard. I've always believed it's a lot harder and it takes a lot more skill to write a world through dialogue, events, and descriptions, so it comes to life gradually throughout the reading experience. Brunner manages to do this whole book with no info dumps. Anything that you find out about a character, or the planet, or the history, or just about anything comes organically through the reading experience. The only time you come close to getting a monologue or an info dump is right at the end, which I'm not going to tell you. But the ending of The Planet of Yan and this performance is explosive. It is. If you like stories of destruction, then that's quite amazing. So, I think this might be a book that I would have to be in a very specific mood to enjoy. Apparently I was in the exact right mood. If you wanted something fast-paced, exciting, if you wanted lots of shoot-em-ups and space pirates or whatever, this might not be the book for you. But if you really love the speculative side of the old sci-fi, that was what I always loved. I didn't even call it speculative back then. I just called it what if. Science fiction was this wonderful opportunity to ask what if about society, what if about aliens, what if you breathe through your lungs, what if you find another alien civilization with which you can bond. All the what ifs. And he does it in this particular book absolutely magnificently. Sitting and thinking about it, having finished it, I think that the book that it most reminds me of in many ways is Rendezvous with Rama. Because in Rendezvous with Rama, aside from the slow but exciting pace, which is very similar to the Dramaturges of Yan, you've got that building of an alien civilization without ever really meeting the aliens. Now in Yan you do meet the aliens, but not as much as you think you are. By the way, I had to look up what a dramaturge was. It's a real word, and it's most appropriate to the book. So that's my new word of the day. Yes, so Rendezvous with Rama is one of those ones where I think that you probably would enjoy. If you enjoyed that one, I think you'll enjoy it both in terms of pace and in terms of looking at what an alien life, civilization, mind could be in extraordinary circumstances. So I really don't want to spoil it. I know there's a lot of people who really love their old classic, golden age, whatever, sci-fi, the same as I do. And if you haven't read John Brunner in general, I think you should probably look at him. Whether you prefer the English sci-fi generation or the American sci-fi generation, he sits right well in the middle, I'd say. And thank you for watching. Try John Brunner. If you yourself have read a lot of Brunner, which I certainly have, feel free to recommend all the books, all the best Brunners that I haven't encountered. And have a great day. And you should read good books, and this is a good book, so I think perhaps you should read it.